Let me tell you this plain and early. Change doesn't need permission, only decision. And when you decide, truly unapologetically, you can shift the whole rhythm of your life in 7 days. Not a lifetime, not a miracle. Just 7 days, 5 habits, and the courage to meet yourself honestly. I spoke to myself with reverence, and for the first time in a long time, I actually listened. There was a moment, simple and almost forgettable, when I caught myself whispering something cruel under my breath. "You're so stupid," I said, just because I had forgotten something small. It was almost automatic, a reflex I didn't question. But that day, something inside me paused, something holy. And I asked myself, would I ever say this to someone I love? The answer was no. And that's when I realized I had never taught myself how to love me out loud. So I began, carefully, like learning a new language. At first, the words felt foreign. You are doing your best. You are still growing. You're allowed to stumble. These affirmations weren't grand speeches. They were gentle murmurs, spoken in quiet rooms and in quiet moments, usually when no one was watching. But they carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were true. We are taught to speak gently to children, to soothe them, to tell them it's okay, they're not bad, they just made a mistake. But somewhere along the line, we stop extending that kindness to ourselves. We begin to believe that we only deserve kindness once we are perfect. And since perfect never comes, neither does the kindness. That week, I challenged that belief. I gave myself permission to be worthy of gentleness now, not later. Every day, I stood in the mirror, not to critique, but to honor. I looked at myself, not just the parts I liked, but the tired eyes, the lines of worry, the old scars, and I said, thank you. Thank you for carrying me when I didn't know where I was going. Thank you for surviving what should have broken me. Thank you for still showing up, even when I didn't appreciate you. And when the critical voice showed up, and it did, I didn't argue with it. I replaced it. That voice that said, "You'll never be enough," I answered with, "I am enough even while becoming." That voice that said, "You always mess everything up," I met with, "I learn, I grow, I get better." It wasn't about lying to myself. It was about refusing to let pain narrate my story. I began writing things down, short notes, love letters to my future self. I'd leave them in places I would find them later: the bathroom mirror, my journal, the lock screen of my phone. They were reminders that I wasn't just living, I was learning. And learners make mistakes. That's not weakness, that's proof that we're still alive. Some days it felt silly. Speaking kindly to yourself feels strange when you're not used to it. We're more comfortable with self-criticism because it feels like control. We think that if we're hard enough on ourselves, we'll shape into someone better. But pressure without love doesn't build strength. It builds resentment. And I had grown tired of resenting the woman in the mirror. So I learned to speak to her like she mattered. I called her by her name, not the name others gave her, but the one she was born with: worthy. I told her she was allowed to take up space. I reminded her that her softness was not weakness, that her sensitivity was not a flaw. I told her that she didn't have to earn her right to rest, that she was allowed to be enough even when she wasn't achieving. Something sacred happens when you stop speaking to yourself like a stranger and start speaking like a friend. You stop rushing your healing. You stop demanding performance. You start honoring the process. You start sitting with your emotions instead of silencing them. And in that stillness, the truth rises. Not the loud truth of ego, but the quiet truth of essence. That week, I paid attention to my inner dialogue like it was scripture. Every time a thought came through, I held it up to the light. Is it kind? Is it true? Is it useful? And if it wasn't, I let it go. I refused to let my inner world be led by the voice of an old wound. It's strange how something so simple can be so revolutionary. I didn't change my life with a promotion. I didn't move to a new city. I didn't fall in love. I changed my life by changing my language. The world didn't treat me differently, but I did. I stopped waiting for someone to see my worth and decided to name it for myself. And from that space, everything began to shift. I walked into rooms differently. I made decisions differently. I stopped shrinking to fit someone else's comfort, because when you speak to yourself with reverence, you begin to require it from the world, not in arrogance, in quiet knowing. That week, I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was practicing presence. I was unlearning the language of shame and relearning the language of love, starting with the way I spoke to me. And once I did, I couldn't unhear the truth. I had always been enough. I just needed to say it until I believed it. Before the noise of the world could find me, I found myself. That was the promise I made at the start of that week, the quiet vow I kept each morning. I protected my mornings like sacred ground, and it changed how the entire day unfolded, not because I had all the answers, but because I finally stopped letting the world set the tone for my spirit. There was a time when I would wake up already behind on time, behind on peace, behind on presence. The phone would ring, the notifications would flash, and before I had even brushed my teeth, I was already in reaction mode. I was responding to other people's urgencies, their voices, their needs, and I hadn't even greeted my own soul yet. That kind of start isn't neutral. It's violent. It's subtle, but it cuts deep. Because when you wake up and offer your energy before you've even connected to your own breath, you're teaching yourself that you come last. That week, I reclaimed the beginning. I decided my mornings would be mine, and not just mine in a practical sense, but mine spiritually, emotionally, energetically. I didn't need the world's permission to pause. I didn't owe anybody my first breath but God and myself. I started simple. I set my alarm a little earlier, not to rush, but to breathe. I didn't grab my phone. I didn't check my inbox. I didn't scroll. I sat, sometimes in silence, sometimes in prayer, sometimes just holding a warm cup of tea in my hands like it was a blessing I could sip slowly. The world moves fast enough. My mornings would not. It's in the early hours that the soul speaks the loudest. Before you're consumed by to-do lists and headlines, before someone else's energy tries to rewire yours. That's when truth whispers. But you won't hear it if you're already running. That week, I finally heard what I had been too busy to notice. I wasn't tired because I worked too hard. I was tired because I never paused long enough to hear myself think. I made a ritual of the quiet. I let stillness be my teacher. I wrote in a journal with no structure, just thoughts, dreams, prayers, fragments of clarity. I wrote to remember who I was before the day tried to define me. Some days, all I could write was, "I'm here," and that was enough, because even being present is a victory when the world is always trying to pull you somewhere else. I began choosing my input intentionally. If I listened to something, it had to feed me. No chaos, no drama, no noise, just soul food, podcasts, readings, affirmations, soft music that reminded me to slow down. And the more I did this, the more I noticed a shift. My anxiety quieted, my thoughts slowed, my decisions got clearer, because when you stop rushing your mornings, you start trusting your instincts. You stop chasing clarity from others and begin finding it within. I learned that discipline isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to honor what others overlook. I wasn't waking up for productivity. I was waking up for peace, for the chance to meet my day on my terms. Because how you greet your day is how you teach the world to greet you. If you treat your time like it matters, others start to notice. If you treat your energy like it's sacred, people begin to respect the boundaries you didn't have to announce. And when the chaos did come, and it always does, I was no longer thrown by it, because I had already anchored myself before it arrived. I had already whispered to my soul, You are safe. You are steady. You are whole. So when the demands came knocking, I answered them from a place of calm, not crisis. People think protection is always about defense, about fighting off what's coming. But sometimes protection is simply creating enough space between you and the noise that you can actually breathe. That's what my mornings gave me: breath, clarity, centering. And in a world that profits from your panic, reclaiming your peace is a radical act. It didn't matter if I only had 20 minutes or 10. What mattered was the intention. That time wasn't transactional, it was relational. A meeting between me and my soul. And the more I showed up to that meeting, the more I realized how often I had abandoned myself before, rushing into the day like I didn't matter, like I was just a machine, a provider, a responder. But I am none of those things first. First, I am a spirit in a body. First, I am breath. First, I am me. That week, I stopped treating mornings like a bridge to something better. I made them the destination, and they started to heal me, because consistency is where miracles are born. And protecting that first moment of the day taught me that my life isn't made in the big breakthroughs. It's made in the daily agreements I keep with myself. Nobody applauds you for protecting your peace at 6 a.m. There's no crowd, no spotlight, just you and the quiet. But that quiet is where you start to remember you are not just here to survive the day, you are here to live it intentionally, softly, powerfully. And the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't a grand performance. It was waking up, putting my hand on my heart and whispering, "You matter, start there." I said no without explaining, and the world didn't end. The sun rose just the same. The people who truly saw me didn't walk away. The ground under my feet held steady. But something inside me shifted, something quiet yet deeply powerful. It was the first time I realized that my peace wasn't up for debate. There was a time I bent myself backwards, sideways, and even broke in half to make others comfortable. I believed I owed an explanation for every boundary, every breath, every moment of rest. I thought that no had to be softened, wrapped in apologies, and balanced with guilt. But that week, I changed the story. I began saying no, not with bitterness, not with anger, but with honesty, without decorating it, without defending it. And it was hard at first, because saying no feels like confrontation when you've been taught your worth is tied to how agreeable, available, or selfless you are. You're told to be kind, to be easygoing, to not make things difficult. But kindness is not the same as self-abandonment. And ease should not come at the cost of your exhaustion. That week, I faced the hard truth. I wasn't tired because I was doing too much. I was tired because I was saying yes when I should have said no. Every time I said yes out of guilt, fear, or obligation, I paid for it in energy. I felt it in my body, the tight chest, the clenched jaw, the subtle resentment that crept in after I'd agreed to something that didn't sit right with my spirit. That's not peace, that's self-sacrifice in disguise. And I refused to keep offering pieces of myself just to keep the waters calm. So I practiced. I started small. When someone asked for something I didn't have the capacity to give, I said, "No, I can't." No long backstory, no invented excuse, just clarity, just truth. And in that clarity, I found a strange kind of freedom, the kind that comes when you stop trying to be everything for everyone. When you realize your job is not to manage people's disappointment, it's to manage your own alignment. And sure, some people didn't like it. Some paused, some pushed, some pulled away. But that taught me what I needed to see. Those who only loved me when I said yes didn't love me. They loved my compliance. And if my boundaries offended them, then they weren't looking for connection, they were looking for control. That revelation hurt. But it also healed, because it gave me permission to stop explaining myself to people who never cared to understand me in the first place. I used to think I had to give people reasons so they wouldn't feel hurt or rejected. But I learned that a person grounded in themselves doesn't need your reasons to respect your no. They trust your self-awareness. They honor your right to prioritize your needs, even when those needs don't include them. And those are the people who deserve your yes, the ones who don't make you betray yourself to earn their love. Every time I said no that week, I said yes to something sacred: my time, my peace, my rest, my healing, my intuition. I said yes to the moments I wanted to spend in silence instead of noise. I said yes to my boundaries without folding them under pressure. I said yes to my truth, even when it was inconvenient for others. That kind of yes is not always easy, but it's always worth it. We are taught to believe that rejection is cruel, but sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both you and someone else is to be honest. A clear no is more loving than a resentful yes. Because love without truth isn't love, it's performance. And I got tired of performing. I don't owe anyone a detailed breakdown of my decisions. I don't need to make myself smaller just to be palatable. I am not required to burn myself out to prove I care. My love is not measured in how much of myself I'm willing to give away. It's measured in how deeply I honor what's real, what's sustainable, and what aligns with my soul. That week, I began reclaiming the power in the pause. When someone asked for something, I didn't jump to answer. I sat with it. I listened to what my body said. Did I feel light or did I feel tense? Was I agreeing from a place of wholeness or out of a fear of being disliked? That pause became my compass. It helped me respond instead of react. And in that space between the ask and the answer, I found sovereignty. The more I practiced saying no, the less I felt like I had to apologize for it. I wasn't being rude, I wasn't being cold, I was being real. And people may misunderstand that. Let them. People may try to guilt you. Let them. That's not your burden. Your job is not to be understood by everyone. Your job is to be true to the one person you're guaranteed to live with for the rest of your life, yourself. And if your no shakes the ground beneath someone, then let the ground shake. Let it expose what was never steady to begin with. You are not responsible for someone else's reaction to your truth. You are only responsible for honoring it. That week, no became my protection, not a wall, but a gate, a sacred filter that helped me discern what could enter and what must stay out. And in choosing what I would no longer carry, I made space for the things I truly wanted to hold. I fed my mind like I was preparing for battle, not because I was afraid, but because I knew what was at stake. The battlefield was not outside of me. It was within. The silent war between belief and doubt, peace and panic, clarity and confusion. And if I didn't arm my mind with truth, the lies would win by default. We often walk through life underfed, starving for peace, starving for purpose, because we keep feeding our minds scraps, gossip, noise, comparison, negativity packaged as entertainment, fear disguised as information. We scroll, we click, we absorb, and we wonder why we feel heavy, anxious, numb. The mind, like the body, reflects what you put in it. And that week, I decided to change the menu. I was tired of feeling like a guest in my own mind, like I was renting space in a place I didn't even recognize. So I reclaimed it. I became intentional with every word, every sound, every message I allowed to echo in that sacred space between my ears. The same way you don't hand a child poison, I stopped handing my spirit anything that would corrode its strength. I began with silence. Each morning, before I fed my mind anything else, I let it breathe. 10 minutes of quiet, no phone, no noise, just presence, just stillness. I learned that silence is not emptiness. It's clarity waiting to be heard. It's where the dust settles and the truth rises. Then I chose my content like I was curating a diet for the soul. I didn't just consume anything because it was trending. I listened to voices that built me up. I read words that reminded me I was not broken. I played messages of hope, wisdom, healing, not fluff, not noise, substance. Words that didn't just entertain me for a moment, but shape me for a lifetime. When I read, I didn't just read to pass time. I read to prepare. I read as if I was studying for the test of life itself, because in many ways I was. Each book, each passage, each line of truth was a weapon against the inner critic that had lived too long rent-free in my head. I highlighted, I wrote notes, I repeated what resonated until it stuck, because I knew what you rehearse, you remember, and what you remember becomes how you move. I watched how the world tried to distract me, how easy it was to fall into mental laziness. Just 5 minutes of clicking this, 10 minutes of scrolling that, and suddenly an hour gone and a mind full of clutter. That week, I said no to mental junk food, not because I'm better than it, but because I needed more than it. I needed strength. I needed grounding. I needed content that didn't numb me but nourished me. I also chose who I listened to. I stopped taking advice from people who weren't living the life I wanted. I stopped internalizing the opinions of those who didn't know my heart. Not all voices deserve a seat at the table of your mind. Some people speak from their wounds, not their wisdom. And if you're not careful, you'll let someone's brokenness shape your perspective. So I got selective, protective. I asked myself, is this building me or breaking me? Is it making me more afraid or more free? And if it didn't pass that test, I shut it off. That week taught me that protection is more than what you block on the outside. It's what you allow on the inside. I didn't just consume better, I spoke better. I fed my mind with my own words too. Affirmations, scriptures, mantras, truths I wasn't sure I believed yet, but said anyway. And something powerful happened. The more I said it, the more I believed it. And the more I believed it, the more I became it. Because the mind doesn't just respond to facts, it responds to repetition. What you hear often, you trust. So I gave my mind something worth trusting. It wasn't about perfection. I wasn't trying to live in a bubble, but I was tired of living in a fog. I was done letting unfiltered thoughts dominate my peace. That week, I realized my mind was a garden, and every word, every image, every message was a seed. I could either grow fear or I could grow faith. I could either nurture confusion or cultivate clarity. The choice was mine. And so I chose wisely, I chose daily. I chose to feed my mind like my future depended on it, because it did. I moved my body like it was an act of worship, not for the scale, not for the mirror, not for approval, but because for the first time in a long time, I remembered that this body, my body, is not a burden. It is a temple. It is the only place I have ever truly lived, and it deserves to be honored as sacred. I used to move my body like it was punishment, like I had to make up for something, something I ate, something I didn't do, some shape I hadn't achieved. The movement came with shame, and the sweat carried regret. But shame is a poor motivator, and guilt doesn't lead to freedom, it leads to cycles. So that week, I changed the why. I no longer moved because I hated my body. I moved because I was finally learning how to love it. It started with small movements. I didn't need a gym. I didn't need a plan. I needed presence. One morning, I just stood barefoot in my living room and stretched my arms toward the ceiling. It felt like prayer. My ribs expanded and I exhaled the weight I'd been carrying. In that moment, I didn't think about how I looked. I thought about how it felt, to breathe, to stretch, to inhabit my own skin with softness. I danced next. Not in front of anyone, not for choreography, just me in the kitchen with music loud enough to drown out doubt. I let my body remember joy. I moved without rules. I let my hips sway without shame. I let my shoulders loosen. I laughed at how free I felt. That dance didn't burn many calories, but it burned through years of disconnect. It reminded me that movement isn't a transaction, it's celebration. Each day, I gave myself permission to move in a way that felt good. Some days, that looked like a long walk in the sun. Other days, it was gentle yoga with deep breaths. Sometimes it was lifting something heavy, not because I wanted to shrink, but because I wanted to feel powerful. Every movement became a message to my body. I see you, I value you, I am grateful for you. I had spent years ignoring my body's needs. I'd pushed through fatigue, silenced pain, dismissed hunger, overrode exhaustion. I treated my body like it was a machine that only existed to serve my goals. But that week, I started listening again. I noticed how my body spoke in sensations: tightness, tension, energy, lightness. I tuned in. And in doing so, I realized that my body had always been talking. I just hadn't been present enough to hear it. Movement became sacred, a ritual, a return. I realized that worship isn't just something you do with your voice, it's something you do with your limbs. Every stretch, every step, every sway was a form of gratitude, a thank you for the legs that still carried me, for the lungs that still filled up with breath, for the heart that still beat, even after heartbreak. That week, I stopped looking at my body through a lens of lack. I saw it as whole, capable, divine. I moved not to change my body, but to remember it, to come back to it after years of distance, to say sorry for every time I cursed it, shamed it, judged it, to say thank you for every time it showed up for me when my mind didn't want to, for every time it carried me into rooms, into relationships, into recovery. I owed my body more than criticism. I owed it reverence. There is power in reclaiming movement from a world that tells you it must always have a goal. Not every walk needs to be a workout. Not every stretch needs to be strategy. Sometimes it's enough to just feel alive, to feel your feet press into the earth, to feel the rhythm of your breath, to move simply because you can. That week, I slowed down. I stopped rushing through every routine. I noticed how the sun warmed my skin when I walked outside, how my joints sighed in relief after a good stretch, how my muscles whispered thank you after a simple act of care. I no longer saw movement as something to check off a list. I saw it as a love letter to myself. And in that sacred space, healing happened. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly. I started to feel more grounded, more aware. I walked taller, not because I lost weight, but because I had gained appreciation. I felt lighter, not because I was smaller, but because I had released the weight of resentment I'd held toward my own body. People don't talk enough about the emotional weight that lives in the body, the tension in your shoulders from years of carrying burdens, the knots in your back from unspoken stress, the fatigue in your legs from running from yourself. Movement helps you release what you didn't even know you were holding, and in that release, you make room for joy, for strength, for grace. That week, I didn't chase transformation. I embraced embodiment. I didn't shame myself into better habits. I loved myself into deeper connection. And in doing so, I discovered something I'll never forget. My body is not my enemy. It is not my project. It is not a problem to fix. It is a miracle to honor. So I moved in stillness and in rhythm, in solitude and in joy. I moved not to arrive somewhere better, but to return to where I've always belonged, home in my own skin. 5 habits, not 5 miracles, not 5 escapes, just 5 quiet commitments made daily. I didn't wake up 7 days later in a brand new life. I woke up in the same place, but I was different. I was calmer, clearer, stronger. Your life doesn't change when the world changes. It changes when you change. One habit at a time, one day at a time, one brave yes at a time. So I ask you, what will you do with your next 7 days?